There is a couple of issues that have to be tackled in this perspective. But first, before I say anything, two important elements that I have to mention. Number one, in my companies, the average retention time of my staff is above 21 years. So practically, a happy worker is the best asset you have in your company. So with this philosophy, I will be speaking as Federation of Egyptian Chambers of Commerce, Confederation of European Chambers, Federation of Egyptian Industries, where I'm Secretary General of the three, as well as Businessmed, which is the Employers Federation of the Euro-Mediterranean, and Ascani. And I'll be jumping from Egypt to the region and back again, so it's a good excuse to, if anybody antagonizes it in his country, this does not apply. What we're witnessing in our region on the political level is the same that we're witnessing at the political dialogue or the social dialogue level, where post-revolutions we had this huge void that was suddenly filled by hundreds of political parties, all of them inexperienced, all of them, without exception, don't have the tools and instruments to deliver what they're supposed to be doing, and worse, none of them is representing anybody. And the same story applies, unfortunately, to trade unions. When you look at employers' organizations, they were well-established organizations. Post-revolution, they carried on continuously. In some countries, like, for example, in Tunisia, Utica, the chairman just changed, but by the end of the day, the institution and its representation and its power remained the same. You had some small, mostly religious, new employers' federations that were established. Still, they have no representation, a couple of hundred members, when you compare to our existing employers' organizations. Then we come to the real problem, trade unions. In all our countries, we had what we called tamed, government-controlled, probably in lots of cases government-appointed trade unions. But there was the infrastructure, there was the system, there was the law. So instead of cleaning up individuals like we did in the employers' federations, we started establishing new trade unions. In Egypt, for example, what's called free labor unions. And a draft law was enacted, but was never ratified. So all what was established in Egypt practically is illegal. But it became a status quo. But the draft law was a disaster. Neither the laborers, the workers themselves were consulted, nor the employers were consulted. So what did we end up with? Every 50 workers have the right to form their own union. Beautiful. Me as an employer in a company, something like the Arab contractors was 120,000 employees. They ended up having 72 trade unions. And the official trade union still existing. So this one wants to raise salaries, this one wants to increase holidays, and they don't talk together, and you have nobody to talk to. So the main problem of trade unions in our region was lack of representation, lack of capacity, and unfortunately they didn't know what do they want actually. They wanted to improve the environment for the workers. Yes, that's a very nice strategic slogan, but how to do it? So you started having major problems in an economy that's already failing. One thing that we should all understand, that for any decent organization, its wealth is actually its human resources. This is where you invest in, this is what really adds value to the organization, and that's what distinguishes any organization from the other. Unfortunately, this philosophy doesn't apply across the board to all employers. One has to be fair in this. Lots of employers are the portrait famous vampires who want to get the best out of the available resources, including the human resources. But that's not the majority. That's a very small minority. Let's not forget that whether in Europe or in the Southern Mediterranean, over 90-something% are SMEs, and a lot of them are family-owned SMEs, which means that the employees are the owners. Let's reflect on the political agenda, because this is what really is the same happening at the trade and social dialogue sides. We're trying to apply the modern definition of democracy in countries, Egypt for example, where we have officially 40% illiteracy and almost the same figure under the poverty line. And this means they have no idea what they're voting for, and they're ready to, or they're forced to sell their votes. The same applies, unfortunately, in the trade union movement. On the other hand, post-revolution, everybody thought that there is this billions and trillions that were stolen over the past years that will come back. And lots of people sat there doing the math and seeing that every citizen in the country will be receiving, I don't know, $280,000 once the money is back. Naturally, nothing will ever come back. So the expectations started going up. Again, in the trade union movement, the expectations going up, where in our countries, we're still producing the same amount of goods and services, and yet we're raising salaries. And I think 101 economics, this means inflation, prices go up, then people start complaining. And here is where the real problem that we discussed in the previous session is transparency, is honesty, is saying the real facts. And part of that is the trilateral dialogue includes government, trade unions, and employers' federations. And unfortunately, governments are non-representative, trade unions are non-representative and not trusted. And you have one monster animal, which is the employers' federations, which is the one that's capacity built, that's capable of engulfing and devouring their partners. One has to be honest in that. We don't do it, but we're capable of doing it. To us, as a country, or we're talking about social dialogue, in both situations, you have to look at the interest of the country at large. Problem number one is the economic agenda, unfortunately, is postponed, where the political agenda takes the forefront. We see it in the politics, as well as we see it in the trade union movement, as well as in the social dialogue. The second problem, because of that, nothing serious is being done at all fronts, and everybody's postponing action to whoever will succeed him. We've been in Egypt, we've been for 2 years having what we call caretaking cabinets. And these caretaking cabinets did not take care of anything, and what they were doing is just postponing problems and looking at troubleshooting, and no vision, no strategy for the future. The same we see in the social dialogue and the trade union movement, where basically they're trying as much as possible and as fast as possible to exist and survive on the expense of doing something long-lasting for the benefit of their members. Coming to the other part of this session, which is the economic reform. North Africa, or Arab Spring countries, were for the pre-revolution 5 years, were one of the top 5 reformers in the world, with huge reforms being conducted that were simplifying ease of doing business tremendously. Post-revolution, unfortunately, we're going with an eraser on all reforms that has been done. We have some ministers, we hear them saying no for privatization. Nobody said selling assets. Privatization is not selling assets, it's simply changing the management methodology. We hear no for IMF standby agreements, which is 1.5% interest with 3 years grace period, yet we go and take 5 billion from Qatar for 3.5% interest, and everybody's happy with it. I think what we need to do to have real social dialogue and real economic reform going on is first to identify who is the representative institutions, and if they don't exist, we work on making them exist, whether we're talking political parties or trade unions or governments. The second thing is we have to be very transparent. It's so easy. One of the nightmares we face every year in the start of the fiscal year of the government, when the government stands proudly saying we're giving 30% increase in salaries. Forgetting that the salary of the civil servant is broken into 5 parts. The smallest part is the salary. The rest are different nomenclature of bonuses. That's why when they retire, they get only 10–15% of what they used to earn. This reflects on private sector, where immediately the private sector says we want 30%. But the 30% of a civil servant, the highest caliber, which is a minister, is £112, if I remember correctly the figure. This is his 30%, where my office boy gets more than that when he gets 30%. So here is where transparency needs to be included. And we need to learn from the mistakes that has been happening for the past decades. I can't say that everything that happened in the past 2–3 decades were wrong, and I can't say everything was good. But unfortunately, it's business as usual. The same mistakes are being repeated again. And what I see is we will end up with a social dialogue that has no dialogue at all. More a social monologue, either coming from the government, it reminds me of our Italian friends. You know, when you're in Italy, you don't need to speak Italian when you're sitting with friends, because everybody talks, nobody listens. And this is our social dialogue at present. There is nobody listening, and everybody's talking and shouting in different languages. And I think there is an experience that the European Union has that could be transferred and can assist. And ILO is trying to do a lot in that direction. We keep fighting together. We say you stand day and night, that you stand for the workers on our expense, but you can't deny that we're good partners. So anyway, let me close confirming that on behalf of the business of the Euro-Mediterranean, we believe that our wealth and our health is our partners, which are our employees, who together we're adding wealth to our institutions. But we should all be honest and logic. You can't, in a failing organization that has financial problems, request increases in benefits, and in the same time you can't see that the organization is making billions and the partners are not getting their share. Thank you very much.